Thank you very much to Robert Weibel. A big round of applause again, please, for Robert Weibel and Trade Commissioner Šefčovič for their insights. But it gives me great pleasure to welcome our first keynote speaker of the official conference, and I would like to ask Mr. Miroslav Kiraľvarga, Vice President of External Affairs and Administration and Business Development, as well as many other senior advisory roles at US Steel. He has been president of the National Union of Employers for the past decades as well, so it's a great pleasure to invite Mr. Kiraľvarga to the stage to deliver his keynote address.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm not sure if I should be feeling much better because the front part of the audience is empty, or feeling worse, but let me allow to thanks to Lukáš and Council of the Organizer to having me today and provide a few initial thoughts on this topic, which is V4, and I would use the EU also and USA trade relationship, and to open the enriching discussion. The EU and the United States have the world's largest bilateral trade and investment relationship and enjoy the most integrated economic relationship in the world. Taking goods, services, and investment into account, the EU and the US are each other's largest trading partners by far. Millions of jobs in the United States are related to EU and US trade and investment. The European Union is a reliable source of critical supplies to US, including medicinal ingredients, pharmaceutical products, advanced machinery and equipment, and aerospace parts and components. At the same time, the European Union is the largest buyer of the United States natural gas and oil, which is an important element for ensuring transatlantic energy security and to allow shared strong response to Russia's military aggression against Ukraine. Total bilateral trade in goods between the EU and US resulted in a goods trade surplus of more than 160 billion euros for the EU. Total bilateral trade in services between the EU and the US resulted in the services trade deficit of more than 100 billion euros for the EU. The EU and US are also major investment partners. EU and US firms have almost 5 trillion worth of investment in each other's markets. US export of goods and services to the EU support 2.3 million jobs in the US, and EU firms' investment in the US employ 3.4 million people. This is publicly available data from 2023. Now, let's move to May 2025. 75th anniversary of the Schuman Declaration. 75 years ago, in 1950, the Schuman Declaration laid the foundation of the European unity, placing coal and steel at the heart of the unique peace project that has brought unparalleled prosperity across the continent and beyond. As the EU commemorates this milestone, the fate of Europe's steel industry will once again determine Europe's future. Today's crisis of European industry reflects the broader geo-economic pressure the European Union is facing. As we honor Schuman's legacy, we urge EU leaders and policymakers to match his ambition and vision. It's time for political courage and bold measures again. May 2025, European business calls for pragmatic restart in EU and US trade relations. As the 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs continues, European business urge leaders on both sides of the Atlantic to restart and strengthen EU-US trade relations. President of Business Europe, the organization which National Union of Employers is a member of, said, with 1.6 trillion in annual trade and over 5.3 trillion mutual investment, the EU-US relationship remains the world's largest and most deeply integrated economic partnership. However, the escalating trade disputes in recent months threaten to undermine this vital relationship. As I was introduced the vice president of the steel company, I have to mention that Eurofer introduced or publicly announced that new EU trade measure needed now to avert collapse of the European market. With the US blanket tariffs now raised up to 50%, the only way to avoid a further erosion of the European steel market and another blow to European steelmakers is the swift implementation of the highly effective trade measure promised by the European Commission in its Steel and Metals Action Plan. A negotiated solution between the EU and the US is also vital to preserve EU steel exports to the US, warns the European Steel Association. With the doubling of US blanket tariffs on steel to 50%, without exception, we expect massive deflection of the 27 million tons of steel previously destined for the US towards the European market, just as we saw in 2018 when the first US tariffs were introduced. Furthermore, most of the 3.8 million tons of EU steel exports to the US are now under the de facto import ban at a 50% blank tariff. Even Europe's highest quality, most competitive steel products will be priced out. To conclude, I'm going back to my friend, President of Business Europe, who said, the immediate priority must be taking steps to ensure that the transatlantic relationship succeeds and fulfills its potential as driver for growth on both sides. This includes finding a negotiated solution that avoids a damaging tariff war, eliminates existing tariffs, and prevents the imposition of new ones from both sides. We should preserve tariff-free arrangements that support our companies in key sectors such as aerospace, spirits, and medical devices. Thank you very much for your patience, and I'm ready to listen to distinguished guests here in an enriching discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miroslav Kiraľvarga, Vice President, US Steel.